Henry received his DVM in 2014 from Ahmad Bello University in Nigeria. He worked with the National Vet Research Institute in Nigeria as a veterinary research officer, where he did on-field, in-lab research studies on a variety of pathogens in collaboration with different international institutions and agencies. Henry joined the lab of Daniel Linares and his group at ISU as a grad research in the spring of 2020. Has been involved with several field-applied research studies, earning his PhD here in May of 2023. He's currently doing his postdoc at ISU and is actively involved with the ISU group in disease surveillance and recent studies. So we appreciate you being here, Henry, and look forward to seeing what we can do.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank the Leman organizing committee for inviting me to give this presentation. So today I'll be giving updates on the economic impact of PRRS to US pork producers. And this will be the outline for the presentation today. First, I'm going to give a brief introduction. Afterwards, talk about some of the methods we use for the study, give some of the results, and then we'll have some take-homes. All right. So this is not the first study that's trying to estimate or that estimated the economic impact of PRRS attributable to lost productivity. There have been two National Pork Board sponsored studies. Then the first by Leman et al. Was published in 2005, and I think he estimated the cost at about $560 million. The latest was by Holtkamp et al., which was published in 2013. Now, the study in 2013 used data from 2005 to 2010. You would agree with me that the swine industry has experienced a lot of changes over that time. I think one of the most remarkable will be the entry of PED into the US swine herd in 2013. We have also seen the emergence and re-emergence of different PRRS variants, sometimes with atypical clinical losses. We've seen increased consolidation of the US swine industry, where we have bigger farms with fewer players. There has also been increase in monitoring, right? We know more about PRRS, and that could be attributable to different factors, one of which is the industry-wide attempt to have the same language, the same lingo for talking about PRRS in swine herds, right? The ASV classification for PRRS. We had the first proposed, and then there was a modification in 2021. The other reason why is because and of course, the ASV classification is based on laboratory diagnostics, right? So to even give your herd a PRRS status, there's supposed to be some laboratory diagnostics. So that has, I would argue that it's one of the reasons why there's an uptick in monitoring. The other reason is the availability of more cost-effective sample types. For example, the processing fluids. I think it was around 2017 and 2018 that sample came to the fore, and currently that's the most submitted sample to US VDLs for PRRS investigation. We've also seen inflation in prices, so there's just been a lot of reasons why we thought that things would have changed, and we thought that an update was needed. So that's what inspired this project. With the study I made reference to, which is Holtkamp et al. 2013, and this study, really there were 4 factors that was put into consideration in coming up with the cost of PRRS. The first factor there is a herd distribution, and simply what this factor puts into consideration is what percentage of the US swine herd are affected compared to those that are unaffected, right, within the study period. The study period actually 2016 to 2020, that's what we use for this study. The other factor, which is really important, is the productivity differences. So herds that are affected by PRRS compared to herds that are unaffected by PRRS, what will be the difference in key performance indicators? The third factor is prices and costs, of course. And then the last factor is the national inventory. What this says is how many breeding females do we have in the US? How many pigs are making it to market? And what's being imported into the US? So these were the 4 factors. Also, I would like to mention here that these 4 factors were taken differently for the breeding herd and the growing herd. So we had 2 different estimates. It's the summation of these 2 estimates that will give us the final cost. I would also like to draw attention to 2 factors, 2 very important factors. These 2 factors here, not only are they critically important to the study, but these are the factors that swine practitioners have some control over, right? And that's the herd distribution and the productivity differences. So what classification did we use? So aside PRRS affected or unaffected, we had breeding herd categories. That's BH is breeding herd, so category A to E. Actually, it's from best to worst. And this is actually based on the ASV classification guidelines for breeding herds. I'm going to talk about what each of those would mean. It's a table there that gives you the big picture. I'm going to start from the worst. Now, the BHD and the BHE will be the first 16 weeks following an outbreak. If this outbreak happened in a herd that was previously naive or previously negative or unaffected, that goes into BHE. If the outbreak actually happened in a herd that was previously PRRS positive, those first 16 weeks would go into BHD. And we did this because we have data that shows that, of course, if a herd had no exposure to PRRS before an outbreak, would expect more losses compared to if the herd was PRRS positive before. Also, there's data showing that PRRS, the clinical picture of PRRS is actually worse in the first few weeks following an outbreak compared to weeks after, right? Even though there's active shedding, right? So they're actively shedding. Sometimes they come to either the baseline productivity or near baseline productivity. Now, after the first 16 weeks following an outbreak, the remaining herd weeks in the PRRS unstable category goes into BHC. And that's ASV 1A and 1B, which will be the PRRS positive, unstable, high prevalence, or low prevalence. Now, if the herd is PRRS positive stable, which is the PRRS ASV categories 2 and 2VX, which would be PRRS positive stable with or without modified live virus vaccination. So those would be ASV 2 and 2VX. And now, the best case scenario, which is BHA, this will be PRRS unaffected herds. And those correspond to the ASV categories 3 and 4, which would be the provisionally negative and negative. All right. For the growing pig herds, we use a less granular classification. And this was the same classification that Dr. Houtkamp used for his study. The unit for analysis for the growing pig herds will be the entire closeout. So the win to finish closeout. Now, if those pigs were placed PRRS negative, they're win negative, and they stayed negative until market, we assign a classification of GHA, to those herds. Now, if they were placed negative and sometime before market, they turned positive to PRRS, we assign the classification GHB. But if they were placed positive, we assign GHC. It doesn't matter what happens before market. Now, when I say positive, I mean positive by wild-type PRRS. Yeah, so what did we do? For the breeding herd, we asked for sow performance data. I'm going to talk about the key performance indicators we asked for in the coming slides. We asked for outbreak history, the vaccination history. We asked for disease status. Basically, we wanted statuses for PRRS, for PED, and for Mycoplasma hypopneumonia. I wanted this by week. Eventually, we had 12 companies participating, and within these 12 swine companies, we had about 297 farms, and this would represent over 1 million mated female inventory annually. For the study period of 2016 to 2020, across all of these 297 farms, we had close to 70,000 herd weeks eligible for analysis. And this is a very, I would say it's a summary of the statistical model we used. We used a mixed regression model. each of the key performance indicators we were measuring, we used each of them as outcomes. In this mixed model, the fixed effects were the PRRS status, the MHP status, the mycoplasma status, the PED status, and in our model, we saw that there was some good mycoplasma-PRRS interaction there. And those were the fixed effects. And for the random effects, we had the farm within the production system, the season within the year, and the production system as the random effects. So what did we see? I'm going to describe this here. So on the y-axis, we have the least square means from the models. And then here on the x-axis, we have the statuses. As a reminder, the BHA would be the best case scenario, and that would be ASV categories 3 and 4, which is the provisionally negative and the negative. The B will be the PRRS positive stable, right? Doesn't matter if you're vaccinating with live vaccine or not. The BHC will be the 16 weeks, after 16 weeks following an outbreak in herds that were either negative or herds that were positive. The BHD will be the first 16 weeks following an outbreak in a herd that was positive, and the BHE will be the first 16 weeks following an outbreak in herds that were PRRS negative. Now, this would be the 95% interval. The middle here is the mean, and then if any two groups have different letters, that would mean that they are different statistically, assuming a type 1 error rate of 5%. Now, as you can see here, this was the most remarkable among all of the key performance indices we measured. And they were all different, with the best case scenario being BHA and the worst being BHE. Now, going to the prevailing mortality, we saw an almost similar trend, with the BHA being the best and the BHE being the worst, really. For the liters farrowed per mated female per year, it was not as remarkable as the first two, but we did see a trend, with this being better than the BHE. The sow death rate was even less remarkable, but there's a trend, right? We saw generally there was less sow deaths in the BHA category compared to the BHE. And then for the sow cull rate, everything was across the board, but we're not discouraged by this, because oftentimes the culling of sows is very much a management decision than a disease-driven decision. So we're okay with what we found here. So this would be what we saw as the key performance indicator differences between herds that were affected by PRRS compared to herds that were unaffected by PRRS. Now I'll be going to the next factor here, and that's the herd distribution. I would like to thank the Morrison Swine Health Monitoring Project. They were really helpful with this. And as Kim had mentioned, they have a pretty good database, because they have the statuses, the PRRS statuses for sow herds, for more than half of the sows we have here in the US, I think over 3.6 million pigs. I'd like to draw your attention to the last row here, and that will be the summary for the study period, 2016 to 2020. This would be the proportion of all the herd weeks within the database that were in each of our PRRS categories. Another way to think about it is, in any given week of the year, what likely is going to be the breeding herd classification if you picked 1 week at random in a year. So across all of the study years, we had about almost 40% of all of the breeding herd weeks in the PRRS unaffected category. We had about 35% in the stable category, PRRS positive stable category, and almost 26% in the PRRS positive unstable category. Now, we're going to move on to the growing pig herds, and we're also going to talk about the herd distribution and the key performance indicator differences between herds that were affected by PRRS compared to those that were not affected. So for the growing pigs, we asked for the average daily gain, the feed conversion ratio. We also got data for mortality rate and the percentage of pigs that were sold in primary markets. Those were the indicators that we asked for from the herds. We also asked for, in the first phase, actually, we asked for the PRRS, PED, and myco statuses. At the end of the day, we had to supplement the data with survey information, with surveys. We had to send surveys out to get enough data that would make sense statistically. At the end of the day, we had 9 companies, data from 9 companies to assess what the differences in productivities were. And these 9 companies will represent over 20 million pigs marketed annually, right? So we had a good knowledge, a good database. Now for the, so what did we see with the key performance indicators? As a reminder, the GHAs would be those pigs that were placed negative and stayed negative onto market. The B would be those that were placed negative and they turned positive sometime before market, and GHC would be those placed positive. We see generally that it got better, right? The GHA was the best case scenario compared to the GHC. And I think amongst all 4 indicators we received, the mortality was the most remarkable. Similarly, we had data for the herd distribution, and we also used the MSHIM data because we knew the proportion of sows that were winning positive pigs, so it was easy to know what pigs are being placed positive. And then we used the data from the survey to distinguish herds between closeouts that were placed negative and turned positive at market or stayed negative. And then for the last 2 factors, we sourced the data from the USDA and for an interpig for the prices and costs. And then for the inventories, we used the USDA data. These are publicly available information. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to rush because I'm seeing that my time is up here. But plugging all of those numbers into a production economic model, we saw that the cost of PRRS currently is at $1.2 billion. And on the y-axis here, we have the cost in millions, and then we have the 3 studies. This is by Leman et al. That estimated the cost of PRRS at about $561 million. The one by Dr. Holtkamp, the most recent, which estimated the cost of PRRS at about $664 million. And now we're seeing the cost here at about $1.2 billion. Well, when we went back to check what's actually driving this increase from Dr. Holtkamp's study, and we adjusted for inflation and size of the U.S. herd, the U.S. herd inventory, we saw that the cost is actually $1.1 billion. And what this would mean is that the first 2 factors I had mentioned before, which would mean the herd distribution and the productivity differences, were actually what was driving the cost, the increase in cost that we're seeing today. And representing this data in other ways, I'd like to thank Dr. Yeske for giving this insight. But if you represent the $1.2 billion annually as a cost per day, that's about $3.3 million being lost just to productivity, lost productivity in the US. And if we have to represent this data also as losses per sow, right? So if you're able to maintain a farm in a status for an entire year, you'll be losing about $49 per sow if you have a PRRS positive stable. That's 2 and 2 VX compared to if you had sows for an entire year in the statuses 3 or 4. So you'll be losing about $49. And you see that there's a trend there up onto BHE where you'll be losing about $400 per sow. And this will be comparing all 3 studies. Just to rush here, this is the green side of the pie chart, or the green portion of the pie charts would be for the breeding herds, and then the blue portion would be for the growing pig herds. And you see this is Leman's study. He saw that most of the losses were actually coming from the growing pigs. In Dr. Holtkamp's update, it's almost half and half, but you would see that most of the losses actually were coming from the growing pigs. And in this study here, we're seeing that over $800 million from the $1.2 billion actually coming from losses from the growing phase of production, and the rest from the breeding herd. So, quick take-homes. The cost of PRRS in the US is now at $1.2 billion, and that is using data from 2016 to 2020. 80% of the increase is cut from the previous estimate is due to herd distribution and productivity differences, 2 variables that are within the control of the swine practitioner. And the growing pigs herds accounted for most of the losses that we saw. Yeah, I think we've been battling this bug for over 40 years, and there is no indication that we're winning. So I would like to thank all participating production systems and Swine companies. We would never have been able to do this study without your cooperation. I would like to thank the MSHIMP crew. They were very helpful in this project. Also, our collaborators at Iowa State University, and for PIC for partially funding this study. With that, I thank you for listening, and I will be open to questions.